Have you ever heard of the mighty King Xerxes of Persia? The one who led a massive army against the Greeks at Thermopylae. History remembers him as a powerful, ambitious ruler, but behind the grandeur of his empire lies a much darker story, one that involves his own family, specifically his daughters. This isn't a tale of royal balls and lavish weddings. It's a chilling account of manipulation, betrayal, and a fate that some might consider worse than death. Let's rewind to the 5th century BC, to the heart of the Achaemenid Empire. Xerxes, after his humbling defeat in Greece, returned to his capital, Susa. You'd think a king would find solace in his family, but for Xerxes, the palace was a snake pit of intrigue and jealousy, much of it self-inflicted. His court was a web of power plays, and at the center of it were his wife, Queen Amstress, and his brother's wife, Artane. Here's where it gets complicated. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us that Xerxes became infatuated with Artane. He pursued her relentlessly, but she refused him. So, Xerxes shifted his attention to her daughter, also named Artane, who was married to his own son, Darius. This time, he succeeded. This affair set in motion a catastrophic chain of events that would shatter the royal family. The story takes a sinister turn over a gift. Xerxes had a beautiful, intricately woven robe that was made for him by his wife, Queen Amstress. In a moment of reckless passion, Xerxes promised his new love, the younger Artane, that he would give her anything she desired. And what did she ask for? That very robe. Xerxes knew this was a terrible idea. He knew it would expose the affair and unleash the fury of his wife. He offered her cities, armies, and mountains of gold instead, but she was adamant. She wanted the robe. Reluctantly, he gave it to her. Of course, she wore it. And of course, Queen Amstress saw it. The queen wasn't foolish. She knew exactly what this meant. But her rage wasn't directed at the young woman who had stolen her husband. In her mind, the real culprit was the girl's mother, the elder Artane, whom she blamed for orchestrating the whole affair despite her. Amstress began to plot a revenge so horrific it's hard to even comprehend. She waited for the perfect moment, the king's royal birthday feast. On this day, it was tradition for the king to grant any wish asked of him. As the festivities reached their peak, Amstress made her request. She didn't ask for jewels or land. She asked for Xerxes to hand over her sister-in-law, Artane's mother, to be dealt with as she saw fit. Xerxes was trapped. He had given his word. He knew what his wife was capable of, and he tried to refuse, but she held him to his promise. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares. Under Amstress's orders, the guards seized the woman. They didn't just kill her. They mutilated her in the most gruesome way imaginable, cutting off her nose, ears, lips, and tongue before throwing her body to the dogs. This was the queen's message, a brutal display of power and vengeance. But the horror didn't end there. When Xerxes' brother, Massus, discovered what had been done to his wife, he was consumed by grief and rage. He planned to ride to the eastern provinces to incite a rebellion against the king. But Xerxes was one step ahead. He sent his men to intercept Massus and his sons. They weren't just arrested, they were executed, along with all the soldiers who followed them. In a matter of days, Xerxes had allowed the destruction of his brother's entire family, all stemming from his own reckless desires. And what about his daughters? Amytis, one of Xerxes' daughters, was also caught in this web of depravity. She was accused of scandalous behavior, and while the details are murky, it's clear the royal court was a toxic environment where women were used as pawns. The sons and daughters of the king lived in constant fear, their lives dictated by the whims of their powerful, and often cruel, parents. They weren't just princesses, they were bargaining chips, potential rivals, and collateral damage in the brutal power games of the Persian court. Have you ever heard of a punishment so horrifying it's considered worse than death? Today, we're diving deep into the dark side of ancient Persia, a story that history books often gloss over. It's a tale of power, betrayal, and unspeakable cruelty, centered around one of the most famous kings in history, Xerxes the Great. But this isn't the story of his grand armies or his epic battles. This is the story of his own family and the terrifying fate that befell his daughters. We all know Xerxes from the movie 300, the god king adorned in gold, leading a massive army against the Spartans. History remembers him for his monumental building projects and his war with Greece. But behind the grandeur and the power lay a man capable of unimaginable brutality, especially towards those who should have been safest, his own children. To understand what happened, we need to peel back the layers of propaganda and imperial glory and look at the man himself. Xerxes ruled the Achaemenid Empire at its peak. He was the son of Darius the Great and the grandson of Cyrus the Great, a lineage that carried immense pressure. He was expected to be a strong, decisive leader, a conqueror, and a divinely appointed ruler. But like many absolute monarchs, Xerxes was also plagued by paranoia, suspicion, and a volatile temper. His court was a snake pit of intrigue, where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal was a constant threat. In this dangerous world, even family members were not immune to the king's wrath. In fact, they were often the primary targets. So, what exactly did Xerxes do to his daughters? The historical records, primarily from Greek sources like Herodotus, paint a chilling picture. While Xerxes had several wives and concubines, his principal wife was Queen Amstress. Together, they had several children, including daughters. The most well-documented and horrifying story involves one of these daughters, whose name has been recorded as Amadis. The story is a complex web of love, jealousy, and brutal revenge. It all started with Xerxes' affair with his brother Massus' wife. This was a massive scandal in the royal court. When Xerxes' advances were rejected, he tried a different tactic. He arranged for his son, Darius, to marry his niece, Artane, the daughter of Massus. Xerxes hoped this family tie would give him leverage, but instead, Xerxes himself fell for his new daughter-in-law, Artane. And unlike her mother, Artane did not refuse the king. The affair blossomed in secret, but secrets in a royal palace rarely stay hidden for long. Queen Amstress, Xerxes' powerful and notoriously ruthless wife, grew suspicious. The tipping point came during a festival. Xerxes, in a moment of affection, promised Artane any gift she desired. In a fateful move, she asked for a magnificent robe that Queen Amstress had woven and gifted to Xerxes herself. Xerxes begged her to choose anything else, offering her cities, armies, and mountains of gold. But Artane, perhaps naive to the danger she was in, refused. She wanted the robe. Giving her the robe was a declaration of their affair. When Queen Amstress saw Artane flaunting the robe, her suspicion turned to furious certainty. But she couldn't punish Artane directly, as she was now under the king's protection. So Amstress decided to exact her revenge on the person she blamed for the whole affair, Artane's mother, the wife of Massus, the woman who had first caught Xerxes' eye. On the king's birthday, a day when it was tradition for the king to grant any wish, Amstress made her move. She waited for the grand feast and then asked Xerxes for her one desire, to be given Massus' wife, to punish as she saw fit. Xerxes was horrified. He knew his wife's cruelty, and he knew the woman was innocent in the affair with Artane. He tried to refuse, but he was bound by tradition. He had given his word. He was trapped. Reluctantly, he handed his sister-in-law over to the queen. What happened next is stomach-churning. According to Herodotus, Amstress had the woman's breasts, nose, ears, lips, and tongue cut off and thrown to the dogs. She then sent her home, mutilated and disfigured, as a living testament to the queen's vengeance. This act of barbaric cruelty sent shockwaves through the family. Massus, upon seeing his mutilated wife, knew he had to flee. He planned to race to his province and start a rebellion against his brother, the king. But Xerxes' spies were everywhere. The king sent his men to intercept Massus, and they killed him, his sons, and all of his supporters before they could even begin their revolt. So where do Xerxes' own daughters fit into this horror story? While the main victim of Amstress' wrath was her sister-in-law, the story reveals the terrifying environment in which the royal children lived. They were pawns in a deadly game of power and lust. Their marriages were political tools. Their lives were subject to the whims of their paranoid father and their vengeful mother. But there's more. Ancient sources suggest this wasn't an isolated incident. Xerxes' reign was filled with suspicion towards his own children. He feared they would conspire to overthrow him, just as he had seen happen in other noble families. This led to a form of psychological torment that was, in many ways, worse than a quick death. Imagine being a princess in Xerxes' court. You live in unimaginable luxury, but you are a prisoner in a gilded cage. You can trust no one. Your every word is monitored. Your friendships are scrutinized. A wrong glance or a misplaced comment could be interpreted as treason. Your father, the most powerful man in the world, sees you not as a daughter to be loved, but as a potential threat to his throne. This constant state of fear, the knowledge that your life could be forfeit at any moment based on a flicker of royal paranoia, is a unique kind of hell. This brings us to the punishment that was considered worse than death. It wasn't just physical mutilation, as horrific as that was. It was the practice of being buried alive. While not directly linked to Xerxes' daughters by name, this punishment was a known practice in the Achaemenid Empire, often reserved for those who committed severe religious or state offenses, and Queen Amstress was known to have ordered it. Herodotus reports that she had 14 children of noble Persian families buried alive as a sacrifice to a subterranean god. Think about that. The queen, the mother of the royal princesses, was capable of this. If she could do this to the children of other nobles, what stopped her from doing it within her own family if she felt betrayed? The fear of such a fate would have been a constant, looming shadow. Death by the sword is one thing, but being entombed in the earth, conscious, in total darkness, slowly suffocating as the dirt fills your lungs, it is a terror that words can barely describe. The psychological toll on Xerxes' daughters must have been immense. Their father's actions led to the brutal mutilation of their aunt and the murder of their uncle and cousins. Their mother was a woman who used live burial as a tool of power. They were surrounded by death, betrayal, and unspeakable cruelty. They learned from a young age that love was dangerous and family ties were chains, not comforts. This brutal reality stands in stark contrast to the gleaming image of the Persian Empire. We see the magnificent ruins of Persepolis and imagine a world of sophistication and grandeur. But beneath the surface, it was a world built on fear. Xerxes' cruelty wasn't just random acts of a madman. It was a calculated system of control. By making an example of his own family, he sent a clear message to the rest of his empire. No one is safe from my wrath. If I can do this to my own kin, imagine what I will do to my enemies. Ultimately, Xerxes' reign of terror couldn't save him. He was assassinated in 465 BC, not by a foreign enemy, but by the commander of his own royal bodyguard, the very man paid to protect him. His death triggered yet another wave of assassinations and betrayals as his sons fought for the throne. The cycle of violence he had perpetuated with his own family ultimately consumed him and his dynasty. The story of Xerxes and his family is a powerful and disturbing reminder that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it dehumanizes. It turns fathers into tyrants, mothers into monsters, and children into pawns. The true horror wasn't just the physical violence, but the psychological prison he built around those he was supposed to protect. It's a dark chapter in history, but one we must remember as a warning about the true cost of unchecked power. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark side of ancient Persia. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. See you next time.